Yesterday I had a scary experience. I received a phone call from my sister about 11 o'clock at night that my mother, who has Alzheimer's, uh, was missing. Somehow my dad went to the backyard to do something in the backyard. And when he came back in the house, my mom was gone. So she was missing for about 5 hours. And at some point, the dog was also missing. And at some point, the dog came back by herself. But my mother was missing for 5 or 6 hours. And it's interesting, the power of the internet. 1,200 people were following the search for her on the internet, and hundreds of people were out walking with flashlights in their cars, on their bicycles, looking for her. So the internet is a very, very powerful tool, for good or for bad, depending on our mind. It's like that about everything, depending on our mind. Any kind of tool can be used for virtue or non-virtue. In this case, there was an incredible outpouring of support. And finally, they found her, and she had somehow gotten into somebody's car and was sleeping in the back seat of the person's car. So people had driven up and down that street hundreds of times, but they couldn't see her because she was lying down in the back seat of the car. So finally they found her, and she's fine. So thank goodness for that. Alzheimer's is a very interesting sickness. Very, very tragic, of course, but at the same time, from a Dharma point of view, it's very interesting to look at Alzheimer's from the point of view of the dissolution of the elements, like we were talking about last week. For example, as the earth element begins to dissolve, we can't hold up our body, we can't support our head, we feel heavy and uncomfortable. Our mind is agitated and confused. So those signs are present in somebody who has Alzheimer's. They lose their coordination, they tend to fall down, their mind is confused, they can become delirious. Then, with the water element, we begin to lose control of our bodily fluids. And we can become incontinent. That's another sign that happens with Alzheimer's, is people stop losing control over their bowels and over their urine. Our mind becomes hazy, confused, frustrated, irritable, and nervous. It's also very common. People with Alzheimer's, of course, they're obviously confused. Their mind's hazy. They're trying to find information, but they can't take it, and they become irritable. It's very common that they can have fits of rage. Luckily, in my mother's case, she doesn't have that, but it's very common. Then when the fire element dissolves, it becomes more, the warmth of our body begins to seep away. Oh, the other thing with the water element, my mom was complaining very early on that her eyes always feel dry, her mouth always feels dry. That's another sign that the water element's dissolving. Then the fire element, we can no longer drink or digest anything. It's very common that Alzheimer's patients actually die from choking because they're not able to swallow anymore, which is related to the fire element. And also, As the fire element dissolves, the aggregate of perception is dissolving, and our mind swings between clarity and confusion. We cannot even remember the names of our family or friends, or even recognize who they are. It becomes more and more difficult to perceive anything outside of us, as sound and sight are confused. So, most days my mother doesn't remember who I am, and some days she doesn't remember who she is. Yesterday she asked me, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Chris Taylor." And she said, "And who am I?" And I said, "You're Susie Taylor. You're my mother." "Oh, and who are you?" So that's partially related to the fire element dissolving. So there's a great Tibetan master. His name is Gyatro Rinpoche, not Chatro, but Gyatro with a G, Gyatru. And he was sent by Dudjom Rinpoche to the United States to establish the Yesi Ningpo centers of Dudjom Rinpoche. And actually, he's the one that brought Chagdud Rinpoche to the United States as part of Dudjom Rinpoche's group. And then eventually Chagdud Rinpoche started his own group of centers. But Gyatro Rinpoche is probably close to 100 years old. And he has had Alzheimer's for at least 5 years, maybe as much as 10 years. Anyway, people that have been in his presence say that it's quite amazing to be in the presence of Gyatro Rinpoche, because all of those things have fallen away. His perception and remembering people's names and distinguishing objects, and Alzheimer's has taken all those things away. Remembering who you are, remembering who they are. But they say that he just sits or lies down with unbelievable presence, completely present, completely awake, resting in Rigpa. So as practitioners, we don't need to be afraid of all of these things being stripped away. Because if it happens during our life, or it happens during the dissolution, during the bardo of death, it's going to happen at some point. But if we recognize the base of our Buddha nature, and if we have some experience with Rigpa, we don't ever get that taken away from us. We just abide in that awareness. And that's I would love to go see Gyatro Rinpoche and see what it's like, because people say it's quite amazing. He's just resting in his awareness, in his Buddha nature. So after the elements dissolve, the inner dissolution occurs. In the inner dissolution, the gross and subtle thought states and emotions dissolve, and 4 increasingly subtle levels of consciousness are encountered. I'm going to pull up a picture of Gyatro Rinpoche so you can see what he looks like. Gyatro Rinpoche. That's Gyatro Rinpoche. So he was born in 1925, so he's 96 years old. So in the inner dissolution, where gross and subtle thought states and emotions dissolve, 4 increasingly subtle levels of consciousness are to be encountered. Here, the process of death mirrors in reverse the process of our conception. When our parents' sperm and egg unite, our consciousness, impelled by karma, is attracted and drawn in to the union of the egg and the sperm. During the development of the fetus, our father's essence, which is described as a white and blissful seed, rests in the chakra at the crown of our head, at the top of the central channel. The mother's essence, which is described as red and hot, rests in the secret chakra, located 4 finger widths below our navel. It is from these 2 essences that the next phases of the dissolution occur. With the disappearance of the wind that holds the mother's and father's essence, the white essence, which we inherited from our father, descends the central channel toward the heart. At this moment, as an outer sign in our mind, we experience what is called whiteness, which is like a pure sky, completely unobstructed, struck by moonlight. As an inner sign, our awareness becomes extremely clear, and all the thought states that are resulting from anger come to an end. This phase of the dissolution is known as appearance. Then the mother's essence begins to rise through the central channel with the disappearance of the wind that keeps it in place until it gets to the heart chakra. The outer sign is an experience of redness, like a bright red sunset filling a pure sky. As an inner sign, there arises a great experience of bliss, and all the thought states that arise from desire cease. This stage is known as increase. When the red and white essences meet at the heart, consciousness is enclosed between them. Tulku Rinpoche said, "This experience is like the meeting of the sky and the earth. As an outer sign, we experience blackness, like an empty sky at night with no stars. The inner sign is an experience of a state of mind completely free of thoughts. The 7 thought states that result from ignorance and confusion are all brought to an end. This is known as full attainment. Then, as we become slightly conscious again, the ground luminosity dawns, like an immaculate sky free of clouds. It is sometimes called the mind of clear light. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, this consciousness is the innermost subtle mind. We call it the Buddha nature, the real source of all consciousness. The continuum of this Buddha nature lasts even through Buddhahood. Never created, therefore indestructible.